Hello and welcome to a Tuesday edition of the Osceola Seminole Sidelines. My name is Pat Burnham, and I am joined, as always, on Tuesday by the man, the myth, the legend himself, Charles Fishbein, who is going to get all of us educated on where Florida State goes in recruiting with a little bit over, a week to go, 8 days ago between early National Signing Day, and we've got Nick Carlisle coming to us somewhere near Disney World, Disneyland, whatever they call it in Orlando.
I'm coming to you live from the worst place in the entire state. No, I'm not talking Gainesville. I'm not talking Hard Rock Stadium. I'm talking Wildwood at the juncture where I-75 and the Turnpike decide to merge, and it doesn't matter if it's a random Tuesday or if it's the Tuesday before Thanksgiving, northbound, southbound, you're going to be stuck in traffic for at least 30 minutes. So
let me give you a clue as to how to navigate that more easily the next time you make that trip. Leave either super early in the morning or super late at night. It makes that trip a lot more tolerable. All right, guys. Well, as always, it's never a dull moment around Florida State football this season, and we're seeing a disturbing trend over the last 2 weeks, and today that trend continued when four-star running back Byron Lewis decommitted from Florida. He didn't decommit ever. He just flipped from Florida State to Florida. We told you about it yesterday. We learned yesterday morning that that was probably what was going to happen. We're having all kind of technical issues like Florida State's having on the recruiting trail. All right, so long story short, we had heard on Monday morning that Lewis was probably going to flip on Tuesday. That is indeed what happened. Reports started coming from all three recruiting services that had taken place. And, of course, Lewis confirmed it himself, not on his own social media page, not less than more than an hour ago. All right, Fish, this is one of the kids. If we go back and look at the guys that we have talked about over the course of the last year, I know there were 3 players that you thought had a chance to come in and contribute right away at Florida State, and one of those was Byron Lewis because of the numbers at Florida State's running back room. Why is it a big deal that they lost Lewis, and why is it not a big deal that they lost Lewis?
Well, it's a big deal because, you want to bring in 1 player, 2 players at each position in every class. I've talked about balance and roster management. Not having a running back in the class is not ideal. So from that standpoint, that's the biggest issue with it. Why it's not a huge deal as far as next year, I think Florida State is going to have guys, like Makai Danzy and Cam Davis and Sam Singleton, and they're going to bring in some guys from the portal that will get to play next year. Lucas will be back. So they have options at running back for next year, but you would like for them to have Lewis on their team.
Yeah, and listen, obviously I think some of this is offset by the fact that Roydell Williams does have the option of coming back next year, which he only played in a couple of games. And then, of course, you got the portal to go through. I know that obviously, Fish, that you've got some prospects we'll talk about in a second. But, Nick, what was your take, and what is your take on the fact that, obviously it's disappointing to lose any commit, but when you lose 3 in a row to your arch enemy, what was your reaction when you saw it?
Disappointment from a couple different standpoints. For one, I think if you're looking at the roster, Florida State, thinking about, well, is there a path for early playing time? There is, but there's also something to sell. There's also something that you can sell from the running back position. It's a position that's been very not only successful, but it's a position that has seen a lot of guys get reps. So you would think that would be attractive to somebody like Byron, who, as you all know, committed in the middle of September when this train was already heading down deep into the gorge. So it's disappointing. At what point would you like to see Florida State play a little defense on the recruiting trail? Because how much longer can we go saying, oh, well, we're only looking for real ones. We're looking for real ones that are going to stick it out. And it's like, does that even exist anymore in today's college football? And why are you asking for it? So it's like, I'd like to see Florida State be a little bit more defensive in keeping some of these guys, because you're right, Pat. It is a, I don't know if you use the word disturbing trend, but losing 3 players to Florida in the span of 2 weeks and potentially a 4th very soon. We'll see what happens. It's disappointing for sure.
Yeah, and listen, to answer your question, how much longer can it last? About 7 days and 12 hours, because the new recruiting cycle will start next Thursday morning in earnest. But yes, listen, I think it is. You don't want to lose them to anybody, right? There's a reason they offer these guys. There's a reason they took the commitments, but to lose them to Florida, which seems to be trending in a northern direction that nobody saw before the season, and with Florida State trending in a southward direction, which nobody saw. I think that's where the concern is, because listen, it's not a good look, and optics matter in today's age of college football more than they ever have before. We know that. We see it, everything from the college football playoff to the recruiting trail. So listen, it's not that he's not the only kid that he's gone. That's 3 in a row. He's again, he was a guy that Fish and I liked as a guy. We all 3 liked as a guy that could come out and can compete early for playing time. And we've seen Mike play running backs early since he's been here, going back to Lawrence Toafili, I believe his first year, played as a true freshman, so forth and so on. And we've seen Cam Davis. And, listen, I know Fish, before we move on to some of the other recruits, I do want to ask you about some of the guys that you think Florida State might circle back to.
Well, I mean, you bring up Florida, and this is what Florida State could do. They have 19 commitments, all right? Only 5 of those kids are 4 or 5 stars. They have no 5 stars. All of them are 4 stars. The rest, 14 of them are 3-star kids. That tells you, from the ranking standpoint, that they could go out and find other kids. There's 3-star kids littered across the country in the state of Florida, and I put some of them up on the website. Yep. From DeAndre Desenor to Ty, the Swin kid that's committed to UCF. So there's options for them to get a good recruiting class and find guys. I mean, like I said, Florida has built their reputation on this year of taking a lot of kids that are just good football players, and it's shown on the football field. The biggest issue I have with Florida State is not that they're losing kids. They need a plan of who they're going to take, because you just can't not sign anybody. We've talked about this. They're not going to have a class of 3 or 4 kids on signing day, and that's okay. They got to fill the roster. A lot of these guys aren't going to start next year, but they will provide depth. They provide competition. A lot of these guys bring in, a lot of them are trying to come in and take someone's job. That competition breeds a better football team. Yep. So it's key that they expand the board and start finding them. These kids, they offered a kid out of Connecticut. You guys put up. I had a chance to watch that gentleman play in the 7-on-7 down here. That kid should have been getting recruited a long time ago when Florida State was struggling during the season, where they don't have to beg the kid now to come. That's the biggest issue I have, is that now they're having to swing back with such a short amount of time. If you were recruiting these guys during the season, a lot of them, while you were struggling, I think a lot of the people would be surprised that their recruiting class would probably be pretty decent, considering the 2-10 potential season they have ahead of them.
And the kids you're referring to is a wide receivers committed to West Virginia, correct?
Yes.
Who is coming on an official visit this weekend, we believe now. But listen, I don't want to get into it because the three of us have already talked about it, and we've shared it with our subscribers and our listeners and viewers. And this was before the bottom really fell of the season. We talked about this summer, particularly when it came to a couple of position groups like defensive end and defensive tackle. They were so focused in, Fish and Nick, on about 8 kids between those two positions. I mean, the pool of targets was so shallow that if they did not hit, they were going to have to go circle back. And I remember us talking about the kid from Gainesville at defensive end.
Yeah, I mean, where would they be sitting if Nicholas Clayton was committed, or they had taken the athlete from Valdosta that was a quarterback that would have been a running back in this class? I think you'd feel better, even though the season was bad, if those guys were committed. I've always believed, take those guys, and if you can recruit above them, God bless you. Go ahead and do that. But you should never be caught flat-footed where you're trying to, salvage a class this late in the process, because it's very difficult. It's hard. Listen, forget the NIL. There's going to be guys you're recruiting that aren't going to get a 10 NIL, but they've been recruited by a coach for 2 years, and now you're asking them with 2 weeks to go, hey, come to Florida State. Well, why didn't you recruit me for the past 2 years? And as a parent, how do you tell a kid about loyalty and this and that? And I know there's money. We've talked about the NIL, but how do you tell them, hey, give FSU a shot? I know they just started recruiting you 2 weeks ago, but give them a shot, and that's where, I think you would agree on that.
Oh, yeah. I remember going back. The kid you're referring to in Valdosta is Todd Robinson, who's committed to Georgia. And I remember after they offered him, I went back and watched his film. And the first thing, and they offered him this past summer, guys, past spring. Not at the end of his junior season, not at the beginning of his junior season. And you go watch that film, and that's a kid that's 65 miles from your campus, an 80-minute drive, and you did not offer him, even though he is one of the most dynamic playmakers in the state of Georgia, which produces, we can argue about it, 4th or 5th best players, state that produces the best players in college football. So I think my biggest issue was the talent pool. The prospect pool was so shallow coming into this year. They certainly thought that coming off the 13-1 season and the 10-3 season before that, they were going to be able to get very narrowly focused, and they thought they were going to hit, and they just haven't. And listen, here's my concern, guys, and before we get into some other prospects. All right, so we all sit here and we look at the roster of guys that are coming back, and we're looking at, and a lot of people look at this through the old school lens of all these guys are coming back. Well, we know that may not happen, right? Because the portal opens on December 8th. So as badly as they have done on the recruiting trail this year, what makes us think the portal additions, there's going to be just where they're going to knock it out in the portal again? So I think those are some of my concerns. If they can't recruit any better through the portal than they did the high school ranks this year, it could be another tough season next year.
Money, you talk about it, NIL. I mean, FSU, you talk about that they don't have money, but for recruits, but they're like down at 12 kids. So there's got to be somebody's got to want to take the golden ticket, man. So like somebody's going to get really well paid. Like if I was one of these 5-star kids, I'd wait honestly till like February. And if FSU is desperate, you may get like 3 times what you're going to get just by them needing a big time player. So,
yeah,
I mean, you as a player, that's part of the leverage, or an agent like, hey, you know what? FSU's a program. We could probably get more, 2-3 times more than we would get at this other school. And listen, there are certain positions have higher value, quarterback, left tackle. There's going to be good interior linemen available because they're not going to get the $500 to $1,000, $1 million contracts, or maybe a inside linebacker. Certain positions are going to have higher value than others. So there's going to be players that probably can be had. We look at it with Tavion Wallace. They may get him now because Arkansas may fire their coach, and this kid, the only relationships he really had that were really good are with Florida State. So they may fall into a kid like that. So that's why it's important to recruit these kids throughout the year, because you don't know what's going to happen throughout college football. So you have to give yourself a chance. Maybe they have been recruiting. We look at this Sperry kid. I think that's his name, the quarterback.
Evan Sperry, yeah.
Yeah. So maybe they have been recruiting some of these kids all along, and we just didn't know it. But you hope so, because they are going to have to fill out the class. We've talked about it. You asked me. I think they're going to have to sign over 30 portal kids. And not all of them are going to be starters. Some of those guys are going to just be to fill out the depth chart. Guys that are going to come in and be second stringers, because they need depth too. This is an overhaul. You're going to see anywhere between 30 to 40, if not more, new players on Florida State's roster next year.
And here's my concern. Now, I think Florida State will get some good players out of the portal. Will they get enough? That's my concern. And here's why. We know the portal is going to be diluted this year. We've heard in the last 24 hours, we've heard Brian Kelly at LSU say, we're going to go heavy into the portal this year. Deion Sanders had his press conference today and says, we're going to do the portal like it's never been done before. And so we know that most programs are trending into a direction where it's going to be more 50-50 high school to portal players than it ever was before. And now you got players that were not teams. When I say players, teams in the portal that are going to go heavier than they ever have gone before, which is going to dilute the talent pool. I mean, it's going to be more spread out. So I think that's one of because everybody thinks, well, hey, we'll get well in the portal.
I think what they have to do is they have to go back to the formula of the portal that they did when Mike first got here the first few years, and find guys, even if they're at the FCS level or the lower Division I level, that were productive starters. Where I think they made the mistake last year is they went and they said, all right, these guys were highly recruited guys that we missed out on. We had relationships. They didn't do anything at their prior schools, but they're going to come to Florida State and we're going to coach them up and develop them. And I think they went away from what worked. And I think they have to kind of go back. I'm not saying you can't take a chance on one or two kids, but you can't take a chance on 17. Like, they went after a lot of kids that had red flags or question marks. When you go back and look, and we're being the Monday morning quarterback now, but you know this as well as I do. When you go back and look at the guys they took, a lot of them weren't very good football players at their prior school. They either didn't play or they weren't going to play, or they were bust. It happens. It's a numbers game. And I think you look, that's what happened with Florida State. They went away. People bring up Jared Verse and they bring up Braden Fisk, but the reality is, even though those guys played at a lower level, each one of those guys were the best player on their team, or they were really good. At least they had the production. And I think that's what Mike and the staff missed on last year. And they got to go back and they got to listen. You got to self-scout as a staff. Hey, why did we miss on this many portal kids? And I think that's one of the things. You got to go and find a kid at FIU that is on a team, or FAU. You talk about the CJ Hurd kid. I've had, I can't even tell you how many coaches have called me about him this week. At least 15. All right. So this was a kid that they recruited, was committed to him. Now they got to go back and try and recruit him again if they want him, whether it's a depth piece or he's a guy that's going to come in and contribute a little bit. But this is where they're at. They got to find guys that were at low, if they are group of 4 or group of 5 type kids that are very productive at their schools. They did that. You go, even though the kid didn't pan out, the kid from West Virginia that got in the car accident, the wide receiver, he was very productive at West Virginia. Now, he didn't do anything at Florida State, but because of an injury. But there has to be that prior that they showed something in at their prior school. They can't take these guys that are just, they were a 5-star in high school, and we missed out on them, but they want to come back now, and you're just dropping down at Florida State and praying that they can.
The frustrating thing about Winston Wright, every time I turned on and saw East Carolina highlight, it was Winston Wright this year scoring.
He had a very good year.
And then, I understand your bigger point on CJ Hurd. I do understand why they did not take him as a safety last year, because the kid is a college linebacker. He's not a safety. He's not fast enough to play safety.
I think FSU needs linebackers.
Yeah, they do. That's what I'm saying. So I can see them circle, but I'm saying understand your point. But I just hey, listen. I know you'll love this reference, Fish, because you're a big fan of his. And listen, I think he's done a hell of a job. But I heard Kurt Signetti talk about what he looks for in an evaluation process, whether it's high school or college portal players, and it's called production. It's not potential. So that backs up the point you just made, that guys that produce are going to produce, right? I mean, everything's a habit. If you're used to producing, you're going to continue to produce. And so I think you're right there.
Hey, look at the Jacksonville Jaguars. They had the first pick overall. They took a guy from Georgia that had 0 sacks, and they said, "Oh, he's a better option than Hutchinson." And I mean, that's how you end up in this position where the Jaguars are going to be drafting at the top of the draft, and FSU is going to be trying to find players to replace these guys that couldn't play. You don't want to put yourself in that position.
Yeah. Well, listen, it's going to be as we've said for the last 2 months. This is going to be a fascinating time for Florida State when it comes to recruiting and the portal. And I want to, before I make my comments on Solomon Thomas, I want to kind of get where you guys are at with him in your head, because he came out today with another recruiting service and said essentially that Florida will win a national championship with DJ Lagway at quarterback. And of course, he was on Florida's campus for an unofficial visit 2 weeks ago. He was at LSU this weekend. What are your thoughts, Nick, since we've had you floating down the interstate for about 5 minutes now? I'll let you kind of talk about Solomon first and what your thoughts are.
I don't know. I don't know if my connection is good enough to answer. Am I good right now?
You're good. Yep, you're good.
Yeah. Honestly, I didn't make too much of it. Look, if the kid's going to go to Florida, we have a pretty good read on why that is. I don't know if I would go as far as to say that they're going to be able to win a championship with Lagway. Obviously, he's a very good quarterback, and he has shown what he can do very early on. But I don't know. I didn't read into it too much. I don't know if Fish read into it at all. It didn't really change how I felt about anything. Realistically, I go back and forth on whether or not Solomon is going to stick in this class. But obviously, if some of the coaching things that we have heard end up being true, he might end up there. So.
Yeah, and what Nick is alluding to, if you have not listened to this show before or followed some of my posts on the board about Solomon's recruitment, there was a rumor, and it was the source. I can't, he's right more times than he's not. I'll put it to you that way. He's not infallible, but he what I was told was that Florida has approached Alex Atkins about a potential job on their staff. I'm assuming it's all filled, particularly with his show calls policy. But long story short, that was one story. And then, of course, he does end up at Florida. But, Fish, what is your take right now on Solomon? And then I've got some updated news, which I did not think I'd be saying when I was talking to you guys about doing this podcast on Solomon. But what is your take on Solomon right now?
I mean, the kid hasn't led on to anything. I mean, one thing is he has been very, I think he's held his cards to his chest. I think he's done a good job of kind of just seeing how this process pans out. He's been committed to Florida State for a long time. He's had every reason to decommit. I mean, if Atkins was the only reason he was going to be committed to Florida State, well, the coach has been gone for 2 weeks. So I don't really have a feel either way. I mean, I can't sit here and try to convince you guys that this kid's going to stay when this thing's going down as poorly as it has the last few weeks. It's tough to say any of these kids are committed. But you know what? Like I said, Florida State has the most to offer them from a playing standpoint and also a financial standpoint. They're going to be able to pay him more through NIL. He likes Florida State. He's been committed to him for a very long time. And the reality is, whether Atkins got fired, he was either going to get fired at some point or move on to another school and probably not even coach this guy more than a year in college. So that if the kid's making a decision based on a coach, I question that kid's decision making, to be honest with you.
And that's the thing that I'm really stuck on is that, let's say that Adkins does wind up at Florida, right? Because of the show cause order, he's going to be off the field, and he would not be hands-on with Solomon anyway, because he wouldn't be the offensive line coach. So it would be a very, I don't want to, I mean, every place is different in terms of how close the analysts get to the players, but it seems like that there are steps between Adkins and Solomon. So I don't, that's kind of what keeps me, I guess, from the fans' perspective, with a little bit of hope that he would stick to Florida State, just because if he is that stuck to Adkins, he wouldn't be coached by him anyway.
Yeah. Well, and that's a fair point, but he would be on staff, which might help Florida attract him. But anyway, and listen, we've heard that Alex has got potentially could end up at a number of places since Florida State, since he's not with Florida State anymore, at least based on the people I'm talking to. Now, I will say this: about 3 hours ago, I was just dead set on and flipping either to Florida or LSU. And then I've had a couple of conversations since then when I text you guys about the show. And I asked somebody, well, listen, when do you think the kid's going to flip, if he flips? And he goes, I think he's going to flip on National Signing Day. And I was like, well, I think that I said, I don't, that means, I said, to me, that means he's sticking with Florida State. And I'm not going to share which of the two other opposing schools I was talking to, but whether it was Florida or LSU, only to say that when I asked this person, do you think he's going to flip to you guys? He goes, the response was, well, he's asking for an awful lot of money for an offensive guard, and numbers are tight right here. So to fit back up Fish's point, this is a money thing, Florida State's got the money to give to the kid, because one of these two schools is not willing to match what Florida State is going to give him at this point, based on what I am being told. So I am leaning more towards Solomon Thomas sticking with this class, and I do believe that one of those two SEC schools is not as heavily involved now as what we thought.
Well, Solomon's going to have a lot of girlfriends at Florida State because he's going to be a rich man.
Oh, he's gonna get all that offensive line money.
Oh man, he's gonna get quarterback money. He's getting quarterback money.
But yeah. So anyway, those two things, those two texts. Go ahead, Nick.
They said, "Well, if you ain't talking business, I don't want to talk." So I'm sure that there's plenty of business to go around. As many as plenty of girls if he gets here.
Yeah.
So
yeah. Well, listen, that he should have no issue with that, no matter where he goes. But yeah. So I am actually leaning more back towards what Fish said. If you had told me that at 10 a.m. this morning, I would have said there's no way I could work my way back into him being a part of Florida State's signing class based on where he's been. Because you and I always say, Fish, show me where you've been, not what you've said. And he has not been on Florida State's campus since his either visit to Florida or LSU. I know he likes the offensive line coach at LSU. Obviously, he's got some buddies from Jacksonville that are going to Florida. We'll see about that. But, yeah, I feel a little bit better about their chances with Solomon than I did, last night when I was going back through the recruiting class and who might stay or who may leave. And I will say this, I think if they keep Solomon, they probably keep Mario and they probably keep Payton Joseph. I think he is the kind of guy that can help them keep some kids because he is high profile. And I think that, Joseph in particular might decide to go ahead and stick, although he's been to Georgia Tech. Now, Nick, do you have any updates on old Payton? So, other than the Georgia Tech?
No updates on Payton right now. I did poke around the Georgia Tech boards real quick. I think it was yesterday to see if there was anything going on. And I don't think anything new has developed since his visit. There wasn't anything that would suggest that a flip is imminent. But which means he's flipping tomorrow. So
yeah,
you know how that works.
Right.
But nothing new to report. I know Georgia Tech likes the kid. I mentioned this last week on the show. They have a lot of offensive linemen committed already. I think this is more on whether Georgia Tech really, really wants him that badly, for whatever the price may be. So I still think Joseph sticks personally.
Yeah, I do too. Fish and I have a similar take on that particular commitment, but
on what, Payton?
Yeah. We got a similar take on his.
Someone's saying, should we overpay for Chroma?
That's my question for you.
Yeah. Whatever he wants. Listen, nothing against Byron Lewis. Chroma is one of my favorite backs in this class. I think he's one of those Sunday players, and I mean it's hard for me to go over a Georgia kid over a Florida kid, but turn on Chroma's film. I mean, he looks like the kid's Bama rolled out for like 20 years and Georgia rolled out. He's the real deal. Give him what he wants. I mean, honestly, Norvell could chip in a couple bucks himself, you know.
Well, I don't know who this guy is. The Golf Week Am Tour of Northeast Florida. That's pretty cool. I like that. I want to play. Yeah. I bet you can get us on some nice courses in Jacksonville area. He thinks he's going to sign with Florida. You may be right. Listen,
who's that?
One of our viewers, listeners, says he's going to sign at Florida State. They have the money.
That must be 12 null or no tears. One of the guys.
I just want some good. I want some good rates at some of those.
This may be Pat's brother. Oh wait, Shane actually believes this.
Yeah, no, Shane would not get on here under assumed name. He would actually just pop on the show and express his opinion and tell us that we're wrong. That's what he would do. But yeah. So anyway, interesting. It's going to be like I said, we're 8 days from all finding this thing out on Solomon and various other kids. So it's going to be interesting to see how it does play out.
Dude, hopefully it's not one player and we just have a loop of one highlight for 20 minutes. All right.
That would make writing up signing stories very easy.
Your capsules. You'll have one capsule.
I am glad that nobody started that yet.
Oh God.
We started talking about doing that last week, and it's been one decommit after another. So we'll see. But anyway, all right. So Fish, if you had to take a guess on next Wednesday, how many high school players Florida State will sign? I think there is 12 or 11 right now. I don't know whether I did deductive. I don't know if I deducted Byron from the count in my head or not. But how many? Let's just say it's 11. Do they finish with 11? Plus or minus 11? Let's just say it. Let's just put it at 11.
I say over. I think there'll be a couple of those Aaron Gresham types that pop up on signing day. You know, the kid that, we found this kid out of Live Oak or Mayo, Florida. He's really good. He had a great senior season on this 1-9 football team.
You get mad at me when I laugh about this stuff, and look at you.
What are we supposed to? I'm laughing. You're flame torching the whole boat. I mean, I'm at least trying to throw some water on the fire, and while the boat's going down, and Nick's over there playing with the band, you know. So it's like,
hey, I said Solomon was going to stick, and people tell me I'm wrong. What am I going to do? What am I going to do? All right, guys. Well, listen. We are not going to have a show on Thursday. We may come back tomorrow and talk a little bit about the Florida game itself. We'll let you know about that. But we did want to jump on and talk a little bit about Byron Lewis, a little bit about Solomon, since there was some smoke around Solomon's recruitment, his comments today. But we will have an updated list of the visitors that are going to be on Florida State's campus, particularly on official visits later in the week. Nick's working on that, and he will continue to work on that once he gets back down to South Florida for the holiday weekend. And so we will have that for you later. But we appreciate you joining us. Please go to theosceola.com. Check out all our content. We've got the Byron Lewis story. We got our portal tracker that started, and we will have more information for you on the Florida game. We got practice reports from today. Well, not a practice report, but Kurt and Bob went down to the stadium and listen to Mike Norvell's press conference, and they had a couple of players that were interviewed, so we'll have those stories as well at theosceola.com. If you're not an Osceola, if you don't subscribe to the Osceola YouTube channel, please do so before you leave. Hit the subscribe button and obviously hit the notification button so that you get updates on when we're doing this, either live or taped. But we should have a show tomorrow if we can put it all together with people's travel itineraries and talk a little bit more about the matchup with the Florida Gators on Saturday night. Thanks for joining us, Nick. Thanks for jumping in on the road. Fish, I appreciate it as always. Y'all have an outstanding afternoon.
Happy Thanksgiving, guys.
Yeah.